Thank you for joining us on the Real Authentic People podcast. My name is Maya.
I'm Donna.
And today we have a special guest with us, our social media coordinator.
Hi, my name is Renata.
And we are ran by the Diversity and Equity Center. We aim to be a transformative, anti-oppressive center that disrupts white-dominant culture, inspires marginalized students to unapologetically take up space and be leaders and decision-makers of social change in our communities.
Here at the DEC, we have 3 affinity programs. Our first one is Thrive, and Thrive creates a supportive and validating space for women of color to show up unapologetically as their full selves. We focus on developing leadership skills to support women of color students on campus, examining systems of power, privilege, and oppression as it relates to women of color experiences, and building lasting relationships and connections. Thrive hosts regular gatherings throughout the year around various topics including community building, identity reflection, self-love, confidence, and cultivating connections with women of color faculty and staff. This is a great opportunity to connect with women of color across campus. Our other affinity program is called MOCA, which is the Men of Color Affinity Program. MOCA is dedicated to fostering a supportive community that empowers men of color through dialogue, mentorship, and advocacy. They aim to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion by addressing issues of identity, masculinity, and social justice while providing a space for personal and academic growth.
As well as QFEM, which supports our program for our 2 LGBTQIA plus identifying students. We engage in study sections, fun activities, identify explorations, community building, and forming connections with the 2 LGBTQIA plus identifying faculty and staff across campus. So our Culture Corner and Find Your People, it's a place to foster discussions around societally relevant topics.
And our Find Your People events are a space to collaborate with student organizations and clubs across campus to facilitate community building, opportunities around certain identities. Past Find Your People events have included First Time in College, LGBTQ plus BIPOC, bisexual identities, and multiracial students.
Now let's get into the nitty-gritty.
So today we're going to be talking about things like racial ambiguity, being biracial, and self-perception. Some questions I wanted to ask you today, Nada, was because I know you're from Brazil, mostly just about like your immigration experience and being here in America as a woman of color.
That's a great question. I think in the start it wasn't really real in a way. I don't know how to explain. Like, it just feels like I'm just moving countries, and I didn't even think about like the cultural applications of that, because whether or not Brazil and America culture is like so different. So coming in here and seeing things that for me were not really considered like something that was like culturally like important, being like so important here, and vice versa, right? Things that maybe I see as something really important, you guys don't see as something important.
What do you think one of those things like is?
I don't know. Like, for example, greetings for me was something that I struggled into like my second year here, because in Brazil, when you're greeting someone, you usually give them a hug and a kiss on the cheek. Depends on where you are in Brazil. You even give 3 kisses on the cheek, which it's kind of insane thinking. And here in America, which is just like a simple like waving hand, like hello, hi, how are you? That was really hard for me because I feel like there's such a disconnection between people, especially people that you're around all the time. The second most striking thing for me was my first ever class at Central. So in high school in Brazil, we have one class and the teachers change the classes. So you're with that like group of people for the whole semester, like for the whole year.
Oh.
So you create kind of like a community or like a family. Like my high school class, we were like a big family, right? And then every time someone new would come in, it would be such excitement. Everyone wanted to talk to that person. So when I got here for my first class, I remember it was the econ class. Everyone was sitting like so spread apart and like just on their phone, minding their own business. And I'm like, no one's gonna talk to each other, like what we're doing. So that was definitely like a cultural crash for me. Like, I wanted to have more interpersonal connections, but I felt like the people that were there at the time, in my opinion, were not that interested.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something like I can kind of like agree with. There's a lot of like the culture here is very much about like individualism almost. So something else I wanted to ask you was like how like did your self-perception change when you moved from Brazil to here?
Yeah, 100%. So when I first came here, you have to understand that Brazil is a very diverse country. It's actually insane. So we have a really big number of immigrants, especially when it comes to Europe. So there's a lot of like Italian people, there's a lot of Portuguese, German, Japanese people in Brazil. So when thinking about that, my grandparents were immigrants from Europe. So in my like in Brazil, I'm considered a white person. However, when I first came here, this stuff
You're
is
called a woman of
different.
color, yes.
Yeah. So like all the privileges that I had back at home, I don't have it here anymore. Here I'm considered a person of color, which I am like at the start was weird. So I wasn't like fully aware or like I didn't want to embrace as much. I was just trying to like camouflage myself with the white culture or what I perceived it was the white culture. So everything just turned when I really noticed, yeah, I'm a person of color here. Like I'm part of the I'm a part of the Latinx community, right? So that was kind of a really weird like switch because you come from a place that you have a lot of privilege to a place that you don't have, you know?
Have you ever felt like, since that transition, I know is probably makes your experiences probably different from like how people the Latinx community was here in America, like their experiences. Has that ever made you feel isolated from that community?
Oh yeah, yeah. So the first years here, I really tried to like find another Latin person to hang out or like just I don't know be able
Create cultural proximity.
yeah, exactly. Just like, hey, you guys are from Mexico. I'm from Brazil. Like, we're Latinos. Like, let's be friends, right? But I noticed a trend, in my opinion, where if you're not Hispanic, like if you don't speak Spanish, for some people you're not considered Latino, which is a misconception, right? Because Hispanic, yes, I'm not Hispanic because I don't speak Spanish. However, I'm Latina. I was born in a Latin American country, right? So that was kind of like isolating. I really tried and reach out to people that I feel like were in the same situations as me or like people that had the same not the same but like similar experience as me, right? To understand better what was happening like cultural wise and stuff like that. So I was just like I don't know, always trying to hang around those people and I always felt like they would kind of like try and speak Spanish to kind of like throw me off or and stuff like that. So yeah, that is and still like that was and still something that really isolates me.
And I think that kind of falls into the perception of like like you might like identify with like a race and ethnicity or cultural origin, but you're not performative enough in that sense. Like you're not like I feel like I hear that a lot. Like oh like you're not Hispanic enough because like as a biracial woman, like my mom is from Mexico and my dad is from India, like that has kind of changed like the way that I outwardly physically look obviously. And so I kind of like feel that like the whole like not Hispanic enough, not Latina enough just because like like our experiences aren't like
Monolith.
yeah.
That experience actually this past year where I was trying to connect with a Latinx person. I shared them my experience, where I'm from, everything about like who I am as long as my like identity goes. So grandparents, immigrants, born and raised in Brazil, and they were like they really turned to me and they were like, "Yeah, but are you a Latina though?" Out of nowhere. So I'm like, yeah, I'm Latina. Like, it doesn't matter where my grandparents are from. Like, I lived an experience as a Latina in Brazil and here in Canada or wherever I go. I'm seen as a Latina woman, right?
Well, thank you for sharing your experience on
Yeah.
that. So everything that you were saying about like kind of being isolated from your group kind of led me to thinking about like racial ambiguity. And racial ambiguity is a term used to define when an individual's racial and ethnic background cannot be easily identified just by looking at them. So yeah.
And I think that like racial ambiguity is something that can be like socially isolating almost, because I think it's really easy for like people in your proximity to be uncomfortable with the idea that they can't, like, we're humans, our brains want to factor people and like label people socially in different ways, and so it kind of creates like a discomfort for people who are like a singular race or a singular culture or something that like they haven't really been perceived through racial ambiguity. Like I kind of understand like the process of like why people act like that almost, but it's 2025.
It's time to pick up a book.
Wake up.
Real. But how do you guys feel racial ambiguity has affected you guys in your lives? Because you just listed off an example that clearly made you feel isolated. But is there any other examples that you guys maybe like that have resonated with you throughout the years? You know.
I think like my entire life I've never really like, I don't know, like had a Hispanic community in my proximity, because I feel like when I have like tried to do that, like they kind of like, I understand why they think I'm potentially like somebody who just like really likes the culture or something, because like physically like you would never assume that I'm Hispanic, I guess. And so like I think I've spent a lot of time like creating like my own culture basically, because both my parents are immigrants. It's like they're both like so very much like themselves basically, and like stuck in like their way of living. And so yeah, I think my entire life like has, it's just been like that. Like I've never really had a Hispanic community in my proximity, and it's never necessarily bothered me and stuff, because I don't know. I love my mom's culture. Like I love the language. I love the food. I love like learning about like the history and stuff when I go there. But yeah, I think it's also something that has been like I've been made a speculation of for it, which is, it becomes more and more increasingly uncomfortable the older I get.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh my god, y'all are acting like you've never met a biracial person before in your lives.
Even though there's literally over 33 million now that exist, which is crazy.
I wanted to ask you the same question because I know you're Black and Filipino.
Yeah, I mentioned a lot in the past. I am systematically Black, culturally Filipino.
That eats, like that
Because
eats.
I literally only had, I mean, it was just me and my mom. I had all my, it was weird because I'd go to school and all my friends are Black, but they're not African American. They're all children of African immigrants. So I wasn't getting I guess, quote unquote, getting the experience of like someone who's like family has generationally been in America and been oppressed. You know what I mean? Like I was getting the immigrant experience in a way. And so at first I wasn't really like understanding, but I also like, I'm also not stupid. I could feel isolated at like 6. So it's like, even like family wise, like I could feel the isolation, like, oh, but like you can never conform because you're not a Filipino enough. And that's kind of where like I was able to understand that like, oh, I'm never going to look like both. Like in my eyes, I look like both because I have majority of my mom's features. My mom is Filipino. The only features I really have from my dad are like my skin color and not even my hair, if we're being so honest. But like I have traits from him, but more facial features from her. So in my eyes, I looked more Filipino, I guess you could say. So it made sense to me. But it would never make sense to other people when I went to school. And so it's just like, what do you mean? You're Filipino? I thought you were adopted. What do you mean? Like, there's no way you practice this. Like, that makes no sense. And so then I kind of started, I guess, hating. Like, it started to turn into, like, a hatred because, like, I'm not gonna lie, I did have a negative perception of my dad growing up, which has altered now as I've grown. But I did eventually learn because of, like, my family not really liking my Black side of me, like to not like my Black side. And so I grew up like, if you met me in elementary school, I was saying I'm a Filipino woman. That's it. and everybody would like kind of look at me sideways, like, really? Are you sure? And that was kind of like the internalized, I guess you could say their internalized depression from everyone else around me. Like, I really did not want to conform for some reason. And now I feel like as I've grown older, I feel like I'm kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum now. Like, all I want to learn is about the history that I've removed from myself. But now I'm kind of like in this space where, like, because a lot of groups that were Filipino growing up didn't accept me, now it feels like the opposite. Now I feel like I'm kind of like far removed from them, which is really weird.
Right. And I totally understand that because it's like my whole life, like I would say like the way that like my household, like with my parents, like operated and the way that like we lived life on like a very daily basis was very much Hispanic coded. But like every single day we were like me and my dad were practicing Hindu religion and stuff like that. And like the values and like beliefs and morals that I learned were all like based in like Hinduism and stuff. So it just left me in a very confusing place, I think.
Was it confusing when it was just like you and your family, or was it confusing once societal like pressures came into the picture?
It was definitely societal factors coming into the picture definitely had something to like do with it, because up until I was like 7, you guys, I genuinely thought that everybody in the world was like biracial. I was like, everybody's parents is from like one parent is from one country and the other one is from another country, and you don't learn about things like that, like racism and like race perception and stuff until you go out into like the world and go to school, and more specifically when you're around certain demographics that have been taught at home already to, I don't know, point these things out, like notice them, like say hateful things and stuff like that. So it's like, it was definitely like societal factors coming into play that really started like kind of messing with my self-perception and like my head kind of like especially as I got older. And I feel like one of the best things I was ever able to like do for myself was like free myself of that. And like something that like I always used to think about like when I was in middle school and high school, and like I had like the real institutional idea of like racism and stuff, and like when I had actually learned like educationally about it and not just like socially. My parents were literally like, I've never experienced racism a day in my life, and I was like, no, you have, and I promise you
sure
have.
Babes?
Are you sure, babe? But I didn't understand them saying that, like especially when I was like in middle school and high school. Like, I've never experienced racism a day in my life. I promise you, you have. And now as I've gotten older and like I've kind of been able to create my own community, surround myself with people intentionally, like who I want, because I feel like college is like a great place for that. Like you indefinitely are picking and choosing the people that you hang out with and stuff. And so it kind of like it just made me start feeling better, and I started understanding why my parents were saying that kind of rhetoric and stuff. And I was like, it's still not true, but I understand now, and that's all you can really ask for.
Actually, I had a question for you, Nada. So, upon coming to the States, I mean, we've talked about how our immigrant parents they just never experience racism, allegedly. But I feel like that also has a lot to do with the fact that they just don't see it as racism. They just kind of see it as like, oh, that's just the way
the world is. Yes. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. Like, it makes me want to cry. It makes
you don't deserve that.
Yeah.
So, like, did that experience kind of like happen to you? Like, was it hard navigating racism in America?
Yeah, because like I said, like I'm considered white in Brazil, right? So I don't know what is like racism kind of thing, because like unfortunately when I was younger I didn't think about it too much. But after I started learning and being like more I don't know, like open for my like identity, I start noticing that a lot of things that people tell me are like microaggressions. So I have had people like come to me after class, like after a group project, and be like, "Oh, you're smarter than you sound." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" "Oh, because you have an accent."
That's
smarter than you sound is crazy.
Macroaggression.
Yeah, that's just racist.
So, and like, there's oh my god, there's a lot of people that talk to me like they were talking to a dog. like
That's so
speaking like
demeaning.
really like slow and not like a dog but like a child, you know. Like I quit one of my jobs here because I had a coworker where he wouldn't call me by my name.
Wow.
He wouldn't call me by my name. He would just be like, "Hey, you," and he was like one of the like not a student coordinator. He would like yell at me like and say things like really slow, like I said, like kind of treat me like a kid, like I don't know what you're saying. And I'm like, this is wrong. This is wrong. That's when like everything kind of like the key just turned.
Like
I
click.
was like, guys, this is not normal.
I do have another question because when you heard the word racism, like first coined the term here in the United States, what did you think about that? Like when you just heard the word racism, was it just like, oh, it's just like something that exists but doesn't exist to me, or does it like by that time did you kind of like, oh, maybe it is towards me?
I was like, but I'm not black. Because like the way that I learned what racism was like people like discriminating black people for no good reason. So just coming here and kind of like relearn what racism is really about. I was like, whoa, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting because like as you get older, kind of, I think you learn about like not just like racism socially, but racism as a power structure. And I think learning that could be one, either really detrimental to your mental health as a person of color, and two, very impactful almost on like the way that it changes your perception and stuff. Like, wow, at least like 70% of things in our lives are like racist.
Like
At least
Minimum.
I don't know. There's simple things that we were supposed to just do it and not even thinking about it. But when I first came here, when my accent was really, really strong and my English wasn't as good as it is today, like going to pay my phone bill at a company here in Ellensburg was a hard task for me because people will treat me differently. So like I would always have to take like someone that is white or someone that is American to like help me out because people will treat you differently for everyday life activities, you know?
it's that crutch that becomes the power structure. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
It's all of a sudden when you need a white person, that's how you know. It's like, oh, that's how we keep them in power. But that's just my opinion. I'm sorry that you had to experience that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. We
Yes.
appreciate it.
Thank you for caring.
You know, I think everyone should learn a second language. I genuinely think everyone would be smarter if they learned a second language.
Another fun fact, I also thought that everybody spoke more than one language up until
Me
I was
too.
like 6 or 7. Like I would meet people, like I would meet adults and I'd be like, "Hi, my name is Maya. Like what's your name? This is the languages that I speak. What languages do you speak?" Because I just thought that
English?
automatically like indefinitely everybody was required to know minimum 2 languages. I don't know why.
Well, I genuinely growing up thought that, well, because I knew that my dad couldn't speak another language because he was born and raised in the States. However, my mom was, from the Philippines. So I could speak Tagalog. Now I'm like in working like Tagalog. Like I could say it for the life of me, but like I can understand you fluently. If I could speak it, you'd probably go, oh, what is she saying?
Yeah.
Just a little bit. But back then, I was very much fluent. I was the most fluent out of all my cousins, even though I was the only one who was half. I'm the only person who is multiracial on that side of my family. So nobody expected that out of me. But basically, when I was growing up, because all my friends were also children of immigrants, they also all knew a second language. So it wasn't until middle school when I was like, oh, like, because they're just like, oh, I couldn't understand my parents. Like, they were saying something. I was like, how could you not understand your parents? They're just like, oh, they're speaking a different language. I was like, okay, how could you not understand your parents? I'm confused. Just like because it was a different language. I was like, how many languages do you speak? English. How many? Just English. What? That's it?
And I feel like another like my opinion is that like whenever you're not really necessarily given the opportunity at least as a child to learn the language that your parents speak, it feels kind of like missing out on like a birthright almost because it's like this is my culture, and it's like we live in America. Like,
Yeah. We're supposed to be a melting pot.
no, literally.
You can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I feel like my grandma never taught my dad how to speak German. She moved to Germany when she was like 8, 10 because of the World War II, and she was scared that people would treat them differently if they could speak German. But I don't know. It's like different times too.
Well, the thing is this is a really like so this is like a really similar like social phenomena that happens especially with like Hispanic like the Hispanic community, and that's where the term like no sabo kids like comes from. And it's true, and this was a huge thing in like the 90s and stuff too, because like I totally understand where that's coming from, because it's real, like it's a very real fear, and it's almost understandable because like in the 90s when there was a lot of Mexican immigrants coming here and stuff, none of them wanted to teach their kids Spanish because they didn't want them to get bullied for being Mexican, for looking Mexican, for speaking Spanish and things like that. And I've heard a lot of like people around me communicate how this like kind of negatively impacts like their cultural experience later on in adulthood and stuff. So it's like, I mean, to each their own, obviously, but it's something that I definitely like think about a little bit, because like it just feels like to me it would almost like would feel like missing out on a part of myself, because a huge part of what I do, who I am, the media I consume, the music I listen to and stuff is like that language. So it's like I'd be missing out on all of these things if I didn't speak Spanish, if I didn't speak Hindi. So it's like it's just like really interesting to me to think about sometimes.
My family is one of those families that said they didn't want us to learn Tagalog at all.
Uh-huh.
I just learned it because I did.
Yeah, my mom always said I know as much as I do because I'm nosy. Because I was just nosy.
You guys were also not my fault. You guys spoke to me in Tagalog. That is not my issue all of a sudden. And like that's the thing though. It wasn't. I was lucky enough, I guess you could say, in my family to be the only child, because I lived with my grandma, my uncle, my aunt, and my mom. And a lot of the times we had a lot of rotating other family members coming in. But I was the only child. They would all speak together in Tagalog because they were all from the Philippines, so it just made sense. But obviously I was 0 to 5 years old. That's the core time to be speaking to a child in a different language.
Yeah.
Like that's how I'm gonna like learn everything. And also I feel like personally the only reason why another reason why sometimes people aren't able to learn their second language is because like in schools they also do say a lot, at least here in America, like if you have a second language you're not going to learn as fast.
Oh my god,
Because that's all not true.
Because in elementary you do fall behind for a little bit because it's like a language like barrier, because you kind of like you sometimes forget how to like which language is which because you're so used to it at home. But it does create a smarter kid as they grow up. But because they're so scared of that initial, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, we got to stop it completely. They're here in the States. They're going to stay in the States.
Which is funny. There's
cultural assimilation, ladies and gentlemen.
Exactly.
Really. There's a lot of studies saying that like kids that speak multiple languages are usually smarter.
Yeah.
And oh my god, I was gonna say, I don't know if you guys remember this, and I'm wondering if they had something like this like in Brazil. ESL classes, like English second language, like ESL like students, ESL kids and stuff. I vividly remember they would this was like my first experience, I think, of like feeling isolated from my Hispanic community, but now like thinking about it deeper, it's like, oh. But, so basically somebody would come and collect all the Hispanic Latino kids from my classroom and take them somewhere else, and I was like, why don't I get to go? Because I didn't really understand what they were doing. Like I didn't know what was going on.
I remember in the classroom I would say, yeah, no, my parents speak Tagalog at home. They're like, okay, but is English your second language? I was like, well, I guess you could say it's both. And then they're kind of like, I'm confused. But my mom always put on the papers that English was my first language. Mm-hmm. Girl, you were speaking to me in Tagalog. Don't lie. but it was funny, though, because, like, if your parent put it down as your second language, all of a sudden you were sent off to the classes. And I was like, oh.
Okay. See, I did not know that.
Yeah.
I have a question for your question. So do you guys have, like, other schools that like are mainly in other languages?
So I have heard in like, I've only heard about this in Texas, I think, and then like, there's probably like similar ones like across the country, but I've only primarily heard of this in Texas. Like, you go to do school like elementary school in English and Spanish. Like the things that they teach you, they're teaching you in both languages, so you become very well versed in both languages essentially.
Yeah, so that's what happens in Brazil. At least I'm from a big city, like I'm from New York of Brazil. It's called São Paulo, and we have schools there's Brazilian schools, and then there's American schools, there's British schools, there's German schools,
Really?
and they all like teach you like besides the Brazilian one, they all teach you both languages.
America, keep up.
No, for well, another thing too is like I was gonna ask you this, like education from like K through senior. Do you have to pay for it in Brazil?
Yeah, I mean we have public schools.
Oh,
I was fortunate enough to be in private school, but you can definitely do a public school.
Yeah, because I was gonna say I truly do feel like public schools in America typically like they operate the way that they do and only like operate in English because it's like no state has enough money to be like funding public schools that will teach you different like languages in elementary school and
But
stuff like
even
that.
in like public schools, I know a lot of people that did went to public schools in Brazil. They started learning English really early. Like I started learning English. I remember I was the best at English in my in my elementary school. Since like I was what 10, 12. Actually no, even lower because I remember like what's it called the school before elementary? Like the one that you're like,
Preschool?
yeah, preschool, like they would put Grease on. That's why I love musicals
Oh.
in English. So we could like just watch it and kind of like have fun while we like do sleeping activities and stuff like that. So I don't know. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Okay, the last thing I just want to mention is just like be patient with people that are still learning your language. We want to learn. So please correct us. You're doing us a favor. Don't be quiet. Be friends with us.
But don't be rude about it.
Right.
Don't be rude about it.
Yeah.
But like, hey, like instead of saying that, you can say that. That's more like proper grammar.
Yeah.
And I just want to finish off by saying that, based on our previous conversations, no individual has the right to comment regarding someone's race, identity, cultural origin, or practices. It's really harmfully social to implicate ideas of Black enough, Asian enough, Hispanic enough, even more so as children and young adults, as it sends out people into this world who can internalize these ideas, but as well as project them onto other people of color in their proximity, which is not good for society, guys. And as always, if you guys want to continue these conversations, you're totally welcome to come visit us in Black Hall 105 at the Diversity and Equity Center.
Ciao.